Free energy change during electron transport. During glycolysis and the citric acid cycle, electrons from food molecules are transferred to NAD+ and FAD, forming NADH and FADH2. These electron carriers bring electrons to the electron transport chain in the inner mitochondrial membrane. There, the energy of electrons is converted to a form that powers the synthesis of ATP. Let's take a closer look at just the electron transport chain. The overall function of the electron transport chain is to receive electrons from NADH and FADH2 and move them through a series of redox reactions. When the electrons are in the NADH and FADH2 molecules, they have a relatively high energy level, and they lose a little free energy with each redox exchange. In this figure, the purple shapes represent compounds that transfer electrons down the electron transport chain. The electron transport chain is made up of 4 protein complexes, a smaller cytochrome protein, and an organic molecule called ubiquinone, or Q for short. This figure doesn't show the actual positions of the compounds in the inner mitochondrial membrane. Instead, they are on a graph that shows the free energy level of each compound relative to the free energy level of oxygen gas, O2. Each arrow is one step of the pathway, one redox reaction. Overall, you can see that the arrows are heading downward on the graph as the electrons are passed from the first compound, NADH, to the last compound, oxygen gas. The electrons are becoming lower in energy as they move from compound to compound, releasing free energy with each step. Of the following compounds, which one contains the lowest energy electrons? FMN, cytochrome C, or cytochrome A3? Cytochrome A3 is lower on the graph than FMN or cytochrome C, so it has the lowest energy electrons of these 3 compounds. Notice that if NADH donated its electrons directly to oxygen, 53 kilocalories of free energy per mole of NADH would be released all at once. In the electron transport chain, however, that free energy is released in smaller amounts, which is later used to make ATP. Let's focus in on the first redox reaction of the electron transport chain. NADH donates its electrons to protein complex 1, which has a flavoprotein with a prosthetic group called FMN. This redox reaction reduces the flavoprotein and oxidizes NADH to NAD+. Why do the electrons move in that direction? It's because FMN is more electronegative than NADH, so FMN has a higher affinity for electrons than NADH does. This means that when NADH and FMN interact, FMN is able to oxidize NADH by removing electrons from NADH and becomes reduced itself by gaining electrons. The next protein in complex 1 is called the FES protein because its prosthetic group contains iron with the element symbol Fe and sulfur with the element symbol S. The FES protein is more electronegative than FMN, so it takes the electrons from FMN in the next redox reaction. Each compound in the electron transport chain functions in a similar way, first accepting electrons and then passing electrons along to the next compound in the chain that is more electronegative. Now let's look at another redox reaction farther down the chain. Cytochrome C1 donates electrons to cytochrome C. Immediately after the electrons have been passed from cytochrome C1 to cytochrome C, is cytochrome C1 in its oxidized or its reduced state? And is cytochrome C in its oxidized or its reduced state? Immediately after the electrons have been passed from cytochrome C1 to cytochrome C1 is in its oxidized state because it lost electrons, and cytochrome C is in its reduced state because it gained electrons. Cytochrome C then passes its electrons onto cytochrome A, which passes them on to cytochrome A3. At the end of the electron transport chain, oxygen gas, O2, is the final electron acceptor of all of the past electrons. Take a look at the whole electron transport chain. Of the following compounds, which is the most electronegative component of the electron transport chain? NADH, FAD, Q, cytochrome A3, or oxygen gas, O2? Oxygen gas, O2, is the most electronegative component of the electron transport chain. It strongly attracts electrons. Once oxygen has gained 2 electrons, it picks up 2 protons from the solution in the mitochondrion and becomes water. All mitochondria require a constant supply of oxygen gas in order to keep their electron transport chains moving along.